one.
Welcome to our town hall, United Against Bigotry, hosted by Senator Bernie Sanders. I'm Missy Rubik, Executive Director of Friends of Bernie Sanders. I'll be introducing to you some of our guests tonight, but also I will help to moderate our live Q&A, which will happen later in the hour. We have some incredible Muslim leaders joining us tonight, starting with the first two Muslim women ever elected to Congress, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. We will also be joined by Minnesota General Attorney Keith Ellison and also Dr. Abdul El Sayed. We're going to be talking about the importance of turning out the Muslim vote, how we got to defeat Donald Trump and come together to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and how by doing that, we also have the opportunity to elect progressives up and down the ballot all across the country. To kick our show off tonight, we're actually going to start with a short video with three young Muslim leaders who are organizing their communities right now to turn folks out to vote. Let's hear what they have to say.
I live in a very small town in eastern Kentucky. My parents came here nearly 25 years ago. After Election Day was the first time in my life where I was scared to leave home. But all of a sudden became that we were the other.
We heard that he wanted to ban all Muslims. He actually came through on that promise.
He runs home to a large amount of Yemeni community members who are affected by the Muslim ban. I've seen our neighbors, our family friends getting deported every single day and being stripped away from their families.
We have mothers scared.
Conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the host of the evening, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you very much, Misty, and let me thank our guests. Tonight is an exciting night for me. It's not only that we have four great political leaders who happen to be Muslims, they're all personal friends of mine, and I want to thank each and every one of them for their comradeship, for their willingness to stand up for justice, and for their personal friendship. I'm going to be brief because I want to hear from our guests. But we can go on for 16 hours as to why Donald Trump has to be defeated. And we could talk about the fact that we cannot continue to have a pathological liar as president of the United States. We can talk about the fact that we cannot have somebody who is anti-science, who has completely downplayed and messed up the U.S. response to the COVID-19 pandemic, who does not understand the first thing about the existential threat of climate change. We could talk about somebody who really does not believe in the Constitution of the United States, the rule of law, and somebody who's trying to undermine American democracy. Can you imagine having a president, a candidate for re-election, who says, well, when asked whether he will leave office, if he loses the election, it's not clear that he will. I mean, but the other issue that I want to talk about why Trump must be defeated, is that historically, even conservative presidents have understood that when you reach the Oval Office, when you're president of the United States, you really are president of all of the people. And you do your best, and some do well and some have not done well, in trying to bring people together to understand that we're all Americans, that we are Americans, whether we are Jewish, whether we're Christian, whether we're Muslim, whether we're any other religion. We are Americans, whether we're African Americans, whether we're Latinos, whether we are white, whether we are a Native American, whether we are Asian Americans, whether we're gay, whether we're straight, we are Americans. And most presidents have understood that as President of the United States, that is what your job is. And yet today, we have a president who very intentionally, not by accident, Trump may be crazy, but he's not stupid. And that is not by accident. He is trying to divide us up, to separate us based on the color of our skin, or, as we'll discuss this evening, our religion or our sexual orientation or whatever. Imagine that, a president trying to gain votes by dividing us up, not bringing us together around an agenda that works for all of us. So let me say what I have said a million times. This is the most consequential election, not just in our lifetimes, but in the modern history of this country, maybe going back to 1864 and the Civil War. And the results of this election will determine whether or not the United States remains a democracy, whether or not we combat climate change, whether or not we bring people together, or we continue to engage from the White House in racist, sexist activities, whether or not we represent working people or the billionaire class. There is no excuse for not voting in this election. You know, I've been around for a while and I've heard it all. Oh, my vote doesn't count. Nobody listens to me. Oh, it's so hard. Oh, I got to take time off of work to vote. I've heard it all. But let me just tell you something. And I tell you this as somebody who won his first election as mayor of the city of Burlington, Vermont, by 10 votes. Your vote counts. And let me tell you something. Donald Trump is in the White House tonight because he ended up winning Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, 3 big states, by a total of 110,000 votes. So please don't tell me that your vote doesn't count. It does count. So my message to you before we get involved in this, what I'm confident is going to be a great discussion, is no excuses. You cannot sit this one out. You have got to not only vote yourselves, you got to get your friends, your family, your coworkers, your fellow students, whatever. We have got to have the largest voter turnout in history. We've got to defeat Trump, and we have got to defeat him badly. So that's it. That's my speech, and I'm sticking to it. And now it is my pleasure to introduce one of the outstanding members of the United States Congress, a congresswoman who won against very strong opposition, a landslide victory for her reelection, and that is Representative Rashida Tlaib, who represents Michigan's 13th Congressional District. She is the oldest of 14 children, born and raised in Detroit, the proud daughter of Palestinian immigrant parents. And she and Ilhan, she is the first Palestinian American woman to serve in Congress, and along with Ilhan, the first Muslim women ever to serve. Rashida, let me start off with a question. You'll go where you want to go. I know you will go where you want to go on this discussion. There's no controlling you.
Oh, don't start.
You're starting already and you haven't even said a word. But talk a little bit about growing up Muslim in Detroit, and what this election means for all Americans, and maybe in particular the Muslim community.
You know, I think growing up child of Palestinian immigrants, I think every child can tell you an immigrant story, and it's very similar, not only as a Muslima, but I think growing up Muslim, especially in one of the most beautiful, blackest cities in the country, actually, to me, brought me closer to my faith in so many ways, because so much about Islam is against oppression, right? Push back against oppressive oppression, or, you know, one of the things that I know our faith teaches that after you take care of your family, your home, you're supposed to take care of your community and the most vulnerable. But I also think, again, being a child of immigrants, there was such a unique lens, Amo Bernie, that, I was my mom's translator until I was 12. And I just even remember as a 12-year-old going to Sears, if folks remember Sears, and going to the counter with my mother, and I remember translating what my mother wanted to say to the cashier, and at one point the cashier looked at my mom and said, you need to learn English, and I, of course, I couldn't take it. I'm kind of a bit of a I can't stand bullies. I can't stand people othering folks. And, Amo Bernie, I looked at that cashier and I said, do you not notice that I'm not translating what you're saying to me? I'm translating what my mother wants to say to you, because she's been yelled at for her heavy accent. She's been othered, right? And when my mother decided, it's funny, when we walked out of that store, she said, we'll never come to that Sears again, because I don't know why you so really mashakal, which means like you're the troublemaker in the family. I still am. I'm a Bernie. I think you're proud of that. But I think one of the key things of what this election really means to my family is, the day after Trump won, my mother went grocery shopping, as she always does, on that day. And she, I checked up on her. I think we all were under a lot of anxiety the next day. I think there was a lot of mourning. And I said to my mama, I said, Yumma, everything go okay? You're okay? And she said, well, some guy, started yelling at me to take off my hijab. He yells at her across the grocery store, Amo Bernie, and says, he won, take it off.
Oh, good.
And, as even though I was a former state representative, my mother only went up to 8th grade, my dad 4th grade, came here for a better future, made sure all of us were pushing us to go and better ourselves and so forth for the opportunities they didn't have. My mother, after being in this country, Bernie, for 40 years, becoming targeted in that way. And I know a lot of my Muslim neighbors across the country have similar stories of their children being bullied in schools after he won. Even announcement of the Muslim ban, how hate crime and targeting of Muslims had increased. It's almost like he enabled that Islamophobia that still existed in so many communities across the country because people didn't know us. What I love about serving with Sister Ilhan and I, serving with her, and we talk about this, is all the stereotypes, Amo Bernie, that people had of Muslim women. I think Ilhan and I have torn them down. Like, we're not oppressive. We say what's on our mind. We're not walking behind men. We're completely, and we come all different kind of backgrounds and different kinds of personalities. And even as both of us as mothers raising our children during this time of with this very, very racist, very Islamophobic president, that has been the biggest challenge, I think, for myself now. But being the eldest of 14, kind of the mama bear of the family, and being my mom's protector to this day, growing up Muslim in America, you almost, especially after 9/11, you almost had to put this kind of ready shield up. And I know a lot of the Black mothers on my block said, our 9/11 happened 500 years ago, Rashida. We've been experiencing this for years. And I think we can't even compare what happens to our Black communities and our Black neighbors. But I can tell you that kind of pain, that othering, the fact that so many people still won't reject that type of hate has been really difficult personally for my family and I. But we're going to outwork the hate, Bernie. We're going to, not only did we go in masses to the airports, we're going to go in masses to the voting booth. And I'm counting on our Muslims across the country to know that we have to take out the man who birthed the Muslim ban. We have to make sure we outvote the hate. We take him out. We show him that you cannot do that to a whole faith like that. We can't stand by and allow that to happen. And I know when we're going to show up in the polls, we're showing up for our communities as well.
Okay, Rashida, thank you very, very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ilhan Omar. She also won re-election in a landslide victory against very, very strong opposition. The establishment does not like her terribly much. Ilhan was born in Somalia. and her family fled the country's civil war when she was 8 years of age. They spent 4 years in a refugee camp in Kenya before coming to the United States in the 1990s. In 1997, she moved to Minneapolis with her family. And like Rashida, Ilhan is very clearly one of the bravest, most outstanding members of the United States Congress, who has had a profound impact on this country in only one term in the House. So Ilhan, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much, Bernie, for the invitation to be part of this great conversation. And assalamu alaikum to my fellow panelists and everyone who is watching. For me, you know, growing up in America as a Muslim has been a really interesting journey. You know, it's one of trying to assert yourself into the normal makings of society and fighting against the voices that are constantly trying to remind you that this isn't a country for you. This isn't a space for you to participate, to thrive, to exist as your full self. And, you know, to be an immigrant, a refugee, someone who, you know, remembers the liberation of what it meant to apply for resettlement into this country, and the conversations my father and grandfather were having as they were going in front of, you know, different countries to ask for an opportunity to get resettled, for an opportunity to start anew. I remember my grandfather's reasoning for wanting to come to the United States above any other country was that in America, eventually everyone becomes an American. And that idea that the United States in itself is a country that is welcoming, a country that absorbs its diverse communities into one, a country that celebrates that diversity and uplifts it, is one that is deeply instilled in my heart. And so my work truly as a young person in this country growing up, and now even as a representative, is constantly reminding myself and others of what America represents, what the ideals of America are. And, you know, to go back to something Martin Luther King said once, is that everything that we work towards is to making sure America lives up to what it says on paper. And so for me, it's meant, you know, the recognition that with hate, we have an antidote of building community, and of, you know, living our lives with compassion, and creating a space where there is solidarity between communities that are living in the margins of society, that no matter what happens, we are not giving up engagement and participation in our society. We are not going to recoil or retreat into spaces of comfort, because that will eventually create discomfort for ourselves, that we are boldly going to show up and push through, because that is truly what it means to be an American, is that you stay resilient, strong, and you work through everything. And, you know, I was raised by, you know, two men who are no longer with us, who believed in America's democracy. And the one thing they were looking forward to when we were coming to the United States is people who had been denied the opportunity to participate in a democracy, was that particular participation. And I got started my political organizing at the age of 14 by taking my grandfather to participate in the Minnesota caucuses. He was someone who understood what was possible once people engaged fully in this democracy, but he didn't have the language ability to access that process. And so I was his cultural and language translator. And, I developed a love affair with our democracy because of it. And the idea that we can use politics to create positivity in people's lives by advocating for policies that have a positive impact was first instilled in me in these conversations we would have with our neighbors at these caucuses. And, to be from a state that really has a motto that says, we are greater than fear, is to also recognize that two of the Muslims elected here come from the state of Minnesota. And, no matter how much bigotry that's out there, how much hate that's out there, how much fear that's being instilled, we can rise above that and we can be greater than that. And Minnesotans have shown us that. And it is such an honor to have the opportunity to be in a position of influence as we are faced with one of the darkest moments in my time in the United States, where, we are not only dealing with hatred that's coming from a neighbor or an individual, but we are dealing with hatred that's coming from the country's leader. And, for myself to be a Muslim elected in Congress, who comes from and is of heritage of two of the countries that are currently on the Muslim ban, is to recognize that our president and his administration and the Republicans that support his policies have actively worked to ban people like myself from this country. And my presence every single day in Congress, it's proof that they can't succeed and they will not succeed. And so as we work to turn people out, is making them recognize that no matter who is on the ballot, our issues, our existence, our dignity, our humanity is on the ballot. And so if we are to fight for what the American ideal is, what the American existence is, what the American experiment is to make sure that we fight to rid ourselves of the hate and bigotry that's being spread by the current leaders that we have in this country.
Ilhan, thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, Keith Ellison. Before Keith was elected Attorney General, he served 6 terms in the U.S. House from the same district that Ilhan now represents. And I will tell you this, that Keith and I were on many picket lines together, and I did not have a stronger colleague in the House than Keith Ellison. And as Attorney General, he is doing a great job right now. So Keith, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Bernie. Bernie, let me say salams to Ilhan and Rashida and Farouk and everyone. And salams to you, Bernie. I didn't grow up Muslim. I grew up Catholic, and I grew up in a household where my mother was a devout Catholic and my father didn't have any use for religion at all. And that was my story. But I did grow up in a household where my family on both sides came from segregation in the South of the United States, Natchitoches, Louisiana. On my mother's side, Georgia on my father's side. And, you know, both my parents grew up with whites only signs, things that you helped to protest against in the 60s. And I thank you for that. Both my mother went to Xavier, which is a school, all black college in New Orleans. It exists because they wouldn't allow black people to go to school in whites at LSU or Tulane. My mother's father, the guy named Frank Martinez, he was organizing black voters in the 1950s. They threatened to kill him so much that they had to send my mom to boarding school. They actually burned her across from the house on Lee Street, Robert E. Lee Street, by the way, in Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana. And that's who raised me. And my father more or less grew up in Detroit. He was born in Georgia, but he grew up in Detroit. And Detroit had northern segregation. So, you know, from a Muslim standpoint, I started looking for answers where, you know, where the ones that were in front of me, you know, what was presented to me was not a path toward liberation. I got interested in Islam at the age of about 18, became a Muslim in 19, and now I'm 57. You know, it wasn't fascinating to listen to my sister's stories, and I listened attentively to both, and I admire their courage and their resolve. Let me just say quickly, it is, if you want to have an unequal society for everyone, you need racism. You got to have bigotry, because if you don't have it, how are you going to distract the majority that is on the bottom to the point where they will voluntarily give up their rights? I think it was President Lyndon Johnson who said, if you can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best black man, you can pick his pocket. And what he was saying was, as long as you give somebody to feel like they're better than, they will allow you to oppress them. And right now, we see, if you compare states like Kentucky and Tennessee, Kentucky accepted the Medicaid expansion, Tennessee did not. And Kentucky's healthcare measures are way better for everybody, black, white, everybody in Kentucky, because they accepted the Medicaid expansion. And in Tennessee, they're much worse. And they've done focus groups and polling in Tennessee. And it's common for people there, particularly the white people, to say, I don't want to give my tax money for no illegals and welfare queens. I'm like, wait a minute. You got heart disease, congestive heart failure, asthma, you got all kind of health problems, and you don't want healthcare expansion because somebody else who you think you're better than might get it? That's racism. And, you know, so often we debate this issue. Is it race or class or race? And we have to recognize that so much of racism blows through the economy. If I'm paid less because I'm black, that's through the economy. If I can't get an apartment because I'm black, that's the economy. If I can't get a loan, I have to pay more for one because I'm black, that's through the economy. And on the other side, if the class oppression that is so intensely felt by people today is allowed to occur, we tolerate it because we think, well, at least I'm better than them. And we're always coming up with a new them. And the original them was the indigenous people of this land. Then the them was the forced labor of the Africans who were dragged here and kidnapped. Now the them is the Muslim community. And quite honestly, there's a fearsome comeback of anti-Semitism where we have seen people murdered in synagogues because people say, okay, the Jews are giving money to the caravan in Latin America that's coming here to take my job. And so this constant need to create a scary boogeyman to distract the people. So you, Bernie, being the candidate who believes in human solidarity, bringing people together, focusing on what we all share. We all need to drink the water. We all need to breathe the air. We all need a decent living. We all want to retire one day. We all need to get some health care. We all need to develop our minds. Focusing on what we need, That is the strategy. And that's why I was so honored to campaign and work with you in Congress all those years and walked in picket lines.
Keith, thank you very much. And I hope we pick up on some of the points that Keith just made. Our next guest is also a very good friend. Dr. Abdul El Sayed is a physician. He is an epidemiologist. He is a progressive activist, and he is an educator. He ran a very, very strong campaign, kind of an historic campaign for governor of Michigan. And before that, he directed the Detroit Health Department from 2015 to 2017. Abdul, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here with you. And assalamu alaikum to all of you out there, and of course, all of my colleagues on the panel. Really grateful for your collective leadership. I got to tell you, my household is entirely uncommon insofar as I was raised by my father, who is an Egyptian immigrant, and my stepmom, Jackie, who is a daughter of the American Revolution. Now, when I grew up, there were very few people who I could point to and say, this person looks like me, or praise the way I do. And I can look up to him and say, that person is leading the way for people like me. In fact, one of them is just over top of my head right here. As I grew up, I came to appreciate that there was something about the differences in the way I looked, the way I prayed, the way my name sounded. My full name is Abdurrahman. There are parts of my name that come out of parts of people's throats that they don't even know they have. And as I aged, it wasn't until my junior year when I came to appreciate there was a very particular way that I was different, and that was going to mark me for the rest of my life. And that was 9/11. I remember sitting in my chemistry class, watching the Twin Towers go down. And the irony of that day is that my little brother's name is Osama. And this is a boy who is ethnically half Egyptian and also has family heritage, blood, that goes all the way back to prior to the revolution in this country. And he was being teased and bullied mercilessly because of his name. And as my brother Keith Ellison mentioned, right, this is the way that racism operates, right? It has really nothing to do with any sense of actual ties to this country. It has everything to do with finding a way to otherize you and to exclude you and to marginalize you. But that was the experience growing up as a Muslim American. But I also want to flip this on its head a little bit, because I want to share another anecdote, because I really hope that it puts the stakes of this election front and center. I spent a lot of my childhood summers back in Egypt. I'd spend time with my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, my cousins. My grandmother was the wisest and most intelligent person I have ever met, but she never got to go to school. She had 8 kids, 2 of whom died before the age of 1, putting her own personal infant mortality rate at 25%. And I remember when I would spend my summers with her, she would pass on the kind of wisdom that you only get from life. And I remember one point, I was getting a bit older and starting to look a little bit older. And she said, listen, I want to tell you something. You don't have freedom of speech here. You can't just say whatever you want to say. And if you say anything about the politicians here, you could really get yourself and your family in trouble. And I was a bit of an iconoclast, still am. And so I wanted to test this. And the next time we went out, I used the choice words that my cousins had taught me about the president at the top of my lungs. And my grandmother flipped out and she pulled me inside. She said, what are you doing? And I told her, look, we're fine. Nothing happened until that night when we had plainclothes cops come to the door. And my grandfather sold vegetables in a fish market most of his life. He was one of the toughest people you ever meet. But I had never seen him afraid until that point. And he said, where's your passport? And I went, I found my passport and I gave it to him. And he held it up like it was some sort of amulet against those cops. And he said, he's an American and he has freedom of speech and can't do anything to him. And they left. And that ability to say what you want to say, to engage the political process, to speak your mind, something that we're all doing here, that itself is on the ballot. Nothing short of our democracy and all of the freedoms and the rights that come with it are on the ballot in this election. And, I think about this moment where I get to spend some time with folks I really look up to, 2 of whom are the first 2 Muslim Americans elected to Congress. And I think about my little daughter who's about to turn 3. And I think about whether or not she will have people to look up to. And I'm rather confident that she will, because in her time, right? What we've been able to do, our community's been able to do, is to build out our civic presence such that there are not one but two Muslim American congresswomen, and so that is how far we've come. But I also want us to appreciate how far we have yet to go. Our community, right? And I told you that the types of folks I looked up to, people like Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, growing up. Our community has a lot to fight for in our own protection. We know the ways that our community has been vilified since 9/11. We understand the ways that folks are trying to actively marginalize all of us and exclude us from civic life, let alone access to the basic mores and means of a dignified life. But when I think about people like Malcolm X, when I think about people like Muhammad Ali, when I think about the original Muslim Americans in this society, they didn't fight for some Muslim identity. They fought for justice writ large for everyone. And as I think about the organizing principle for all of us, right, it is not just about fighting for your own. It is also about fighting for the ideals that include all of us. And what I loved about all the comments that came before me is that there is a real focus on the push for justice, not just us, but justice. And that responsibility is the kind of thing that should bring us together. And in our faith tradition, there is, as my sister Rashida mentioned, there is a real focus on fighting oppression. In fact, in the Quran itself, it is said that if you want to achieve consciousness of God, that you have to fight for justice. And that means seek justice. That is proximity to consciousness of God. And so it is right there with the very foundations of a monotheistic faith to fight for justice. And that is the work. And so that means that we have to be willing to stand up beyond the identities that we share, but for the ideals that this country was founded on, for basic ideals that everybody in this country, in the richest, most powerful country in the world, should have healthcare. That we need to save our planet, and we can do it by rethinking our economy and investing in jobs. That to get a higher education and invest in a growing brain, you shouldn't have to go into hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. That when any child has to breathe the pollutants coming out of a factory, all of us are the sicker for it. These are the basic ideals that we have to fight for, that we need to come to the table for. And as we vote as a community broadly, and I'm speaking specifically to the Muslim community now, we have to recognize that our ability to make our mark on our society is about whether or not we are willing to put down for justice for everybody else. And that is what is at stake in this election. So I know a lot of folks are somewhat frustrated with the choices that they have. And I know that a lot of us wanted to vote for Bernie for president. But I also know that we have a responsibility to fight for justice. And I know that we will not miss that opportunity.
Abdul, thank you very much. Let me throw out a question. Let me be personal here. I'm Jewish. My father's family was wiped out by Hitler. I think it was Rashida mentioned her grandparents. My grandmother, I think, was illiterate, spoke with a very heavy accent. We grew up with no money as well. Give me a sense of what is the essence, and Keith touched on this. Why does a society need racism? Why is it imperative that people on top play off one group of people against another? I often remember as a kid in the 1950s, the poorest white working people in this country were in Mississippi. The poorest, they didn't have nothing. All they had was they can go to a stupid drinking water, which was for whites only. And they were better than blacks. And they had nothing. Talk a little bit, somebody jump in, whoever would they like to, about the function of racism in a hyper-capitalist society.
I'll say, Bernie, that I think that a good society, the beloved community that Martin Luther King talked about, really needs human solidarity. But an unjust society, a society that is premised on the rich and the privileged having a lot and everybody else struggling to get by, needs that division, because it is the way that you can divide people. You need to divide them. It's so natural for people to come together. They had to pass laws in this country against what they call miscegenation. because people will naturally come together. People don't care. They come together, Black, white, Latino, Native American, any religion, but you need laws and you need rules. One way of looking at racism is not these white folks were mean to these brown folks. Another way to look at racism is these people who are elites need to manipulate everybody on the bottom so that those people don't come together to make a more just social order. So what our antidote is solidarity. That's we come together, we can make life better for all of us.
Anybody else want to, Rashida, Ilhan, you want to jump in on that one?
You know, I'm a birdie. One of the things that I always tell people, if you kind of almost open up the curtain and you're going to find the people behind that curtain are the folks making so much money off of racism, off of the economic divide, the broken healthcare system, mass incarceration, poverty. If you look at and just open the curtain, you're like, that's the same person and company and billionaire that is poisoning Flint water, right? They're responsible. They're the people, if you look behind, like how did that even happen? Is because somebody, a corporation, right, tried to make money off of communities like that. If you look at even just poverty in our country and just, you know, the tremendous amount of poverty in our country, the working class. I mean, if you look at, I mean, even in Detroit, 1 out of 4 of my neighbors are essential workers. This still had to show up during this pandemic and risk their lives. People make money off of this very painful othering and treating people less human and dehumanization policies that are so a part of our education system, our the way we even do like local government work, all of that. And so it is very much, and I talk about this with you all the time, corporate greed is such a disease in our country. It is also connected to the racism, to this really, I feel like, dehumanization that is happening not only to our indigenous brothers and sisters, but continue to happen to so many of our neighbors across this nation. They are making so much money off of this pain and suffering right now.
I want to jump in. I really appreciated the 2 points that were made, but you know, here's the thing about late stage capitalism is that it creates injustice. And I actually think that there's something in our nature that bucks against it. We don't like to see injustice unless someone can give us a good excuse for it. And you know, we hear this excuse about agency, right? That people who work hard in the system, they're the ones who win. And if everybody else had worked hard too, then they'd be winners too. But actually the problem is that these people worked hard and these people didn't. Race is a systematic way to excuse the injustice of late stage capitalism. It is a way to argue that some groups are just deficient and that they do not deserve to win because there is something deficient inside of them. And it is entirely a self-fulfilling excuse, right? So once you take away the resources for success systematically from a group of people, be they the social resources or the economic resources or the health resources to succeed, and then you point to them and say, well, it's because those folks didn't work hard enough, right? Then you can justify continuing to take away those resources because it's self-fulfilling. And so the construct of racism becomes an excuse, a fig leaf for the inherent injustice that is created in a system where we allow the beginning of the race to shape every part of that entire race and justify it through the systematic marginalization and reduction of groups of people.
Ilhan, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think it is unfortunate, right, that the idea that people's destinies are tied to one another is one that is demonized. You know, when you talk about the policies that you were campaigning on in your presidential race, where it's policies for all, right? That Medicare for all, meaning every single person will get coverage, and the idea that you are willing to live without access to full healthcare coverage just so that somebody else can't have it, is one that we all think is ridiculous, but it's something that people, for some odd reason, buy into because they can't recognize how, you know, we all benefit in a system where everybody has access to basics. And the, you know, there is messaging, I think, for so long that has sort of penetrated the conscience of folks, where, you know, too many people aren't willing to question how a billionaire has, you know, manipulated the system into not paying their share of taxes, how they haven't used any of their resources in helping care for the people that have earned them that wealth, where the people on the bottom are focused and distracted on, you know, the next person who has less than them, and how they are getting anything that they shouldn't have a right to.
Okay, Misty, I think, are we ready for some questions?
Yeah, we have a few folks who are tuned in live now. So we're going to start first with Aisha Ahmed, who is tuning in from Noblesville, Indiana. Aisha is an organizer. Welcome to the show, Aisha. What's your question for the panel?
Hey, thank you so much. So my question's on healthcare and how we can ensure families aren't crushed by a system that leaves so many burdened with debt and lack of access to quality care. This question is really personal for me because of my dad, Shakil Ahmed. Shakil means great personality, and he really was the greatest of all time. But he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2018 and paralyzed as a result of the tumor, and shortly left us the next year in 2019. My mother, brother, and I are still paying off the debt from the ambulances, the pills, the tests, the treatment, the equipment. I still remember the day that he lost his job. I was in the hospital and it was Eid day, and his employer called me with the news. So he quietly drained out his 401k, his credit cards, his savings, but we still get bills in the mail, anywhere from $200 to $20,000. Our family fought the hardest we could for him, but the only recognition we have of that is in the bills. So I guess my question to the panel is, how can we as a community, and how you as elected officials, how can we work together to provide families that sense of security when everything else is so insecure? Thanks.
Well, Aisha, thank you so much for that question. And I'm going to give it over to Abdul in a minute, because he's the one doctor we have on the panel here. But let me just say this. You know, I have had the privilege of having town meetings all over this country. And as often as not, that's exactly what you just said, Aisha, is exactly what we focused on. And once you get a group of a few hundred people in a room and you start talking about healthcare, the stories that we hear bring you to tears. I mean, without exception, almost, people start crying. Your story about your father, people who are hounded by bill collectors, people who have lost husbands, wives because they don't have enough money to go to a doctor, people who can't afford the prescription drugs that they need. Some 500,000 people go bankrupt in America because of medically related debt. So I will just give you the short answer, and others can then jump in. Well, I think all four of us are in agreement on this. Number one, Aisha, healthcare is a human right. It's not a privilege. It's not a job benefit. Everybody in this country is entitled to comprehensive healthcare, whether you're a zillionaire, whether you're unemployed, whether you're poor, whether you're old, whether you're young. And this is not a radical idea, you know, that the four of us are thinking about here. This exists in almost every major country on earth. Aisha, I am talking to you right now from Burlington, Vermont. 50 miles north of me is Canada. And in Canada, country smaller than ours, but in many ways like ours, people go to any doctor they want. They go to any hospital that they want. And when they come out of 2 months being in the hospital, their bill is zero. They don't have to pay a nickel out of their own pockets. They don't have to take out their credit card. And yet, despite covering all of their people, they are spending about 50% per person of what we spend on healthcare. Because the function of our healthcare system is not to provide quality care to all, it is to make huge profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies, which is exactly what's happening. And ironically, in the midst of this terrible pandemic, where so many people have become sick and over 200,000 have died, the profits of the healthcare industry are soaring. How insane is that? So to answer your question, bottom line is we have got to fight for a Medicare for all single payer healthcare system, comprehensive healthcare, including mental health, dental care, eye care, hearing aids. And we can do that without spending a nickel more than we're currently spending, because the function of healthcare is not to make billions in profits for the insurance companies. Abdul Sayed has written the book on this issue. So why don't I turn it over to Abdul? Do you want to take a shot at Aisha's question?
Sure. Aisha, first, I just want to say I'm really sorry for your loss. Allah yarham, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept your father.
Thank you.
You know, I just looked up what the largest insurance company in your state was. It's Anthem, and what their CEO's health compensation was in 2019 was $14.1 million. And I just want to put it in perspective. How does a health insurance CEO make $14 million? The way that health insurance works is that you're supposed to take in money so people can be insured, the operative word being sure, and then you are supposed to spend it on people's health care. The way that a CEO and a health insurance company makes money is by keeping the money that people paid in to have care, to be sure of their care, right? And this CEO saw it as justified that he or she, Gail Boudreaux is the name, should be keeping $14.1 million of the money that people paid in to secure themselves from catastrophe in healthcare, right? That is the way this entire industry works. And who loses? Well, folks like your family who both lost a loved one, but then had to suffer the consequences of getting bill after bill after bill in the mail because an insured person, right, then had to pay extra money on top of the premium that already was paid in the form of a deductible or a copay. And so a lot of folks will tell you, right, that we need a health insurance industry because it's the bulwark, it's the spine of the American healthcare system. And my ask is, in what business do we ever say that anyone needs a middleman? Because that's what insurance corporations are, especially a middleman who's willing to take $14 million of the money that people pay to secure the health of their loved ones and the people that they care about most. Medicare for All says that you actually get all the choice you want of doctors because there is no more middleman. There is no more CEO making $14.1 million because the government becomes your health insurer. This is not a radical idea. Every other high income country in the world does this. I was on a call with a group from Japan talking about the elections, and they were saying, well, you know, America is caught between its two most radical sides. And I looked at them for a second and I said, what do you mean by radical? Right? I mean, in Japan, do you all have single payer healthcare? They're like, yeah. In Japan, have you all invested in clean energy? Yeah. In Japan, do you pay for your college education? Yeah. So what makes it radical? It just makes it obvious. And so, you know, this is about deciding that we will follow the rest of the high income world and secure access to a basic good for everyone so that large corporations can't continue to profiteer at the tune of 15% off the dollar for money that people stowed to care for the people they care about most. And again, I'm really sorry for your loss. Let's work toward a world where nothing like that ever happens again.
Rashida or Ilhan, did you want to jump in on that discussion on Aisha's question?
I mean, first of all, Allah yarrahma, Aisha, it's really sad to hear about not just the loss of your father and the circumstances, but what your family is currently dealing with. And I just think, you know, it can't be lost on anyone just how unfortunate it is to find out that a family member has got a terminal illness and then to have the misfortune of having to worry about the burden it is to care for that person, and the burden it is to financially worry even after they lose their battle with that terminal illness, that you now are not only dealing with that loss, but you now have to deal with, the financial consequences of discovering care. But I think even on an individual level, I can't imagine what it means to get cancer or diabetes or any sort of illness, and think about, now I have to get rid of my retirement plan. Now I have to drain my credit cards and my savings. And, as a mother of 3, I can't even imagine what it would mean to live with that anxiety, and how much that would even make me sicker and quicker. And so, to live in the United States, to know that we don't have scarcity, but we have greed, and we haven't figured out a way to deal with the obvious, as Dr. Saeed was saying, of providing the basics to every single American. We do have the resources to do so. We just don't have the willpower, and it's going to be up to all of us to create that and to have the courage to continue to champion Medicare for all.
Rashida, you live in a community where a lot of folks are struggling with healthcare. Do you want to answer that question?
I thank you, Amma Bernie. I think Aisha, thank you for your courage in sharing that lived experience. I know how hard it is sometimes to talk about that kind of loss. It's so personal. And so thank you for your vulnerability. I also want folks to listen to this, because it's not, Muslim families are going through this broken healthcare system just like any other family. And, Black pastor in my district said it to me, that we're not a country that's divided, we're a country that's disconnected. I hope, folks that are listening to you, Aisha, understand how we're all really connected from all the broken systems that are hurting our families. And just know that many of us hear you. Your lived experience in sharing that with us is just a reminder to many of us on this panel that we have to fight for universal health care. We have to take out corporate greed out of our healthcare system in our country. And so I want to thank you so much for sharing and being open. I think if your father was here, he'd be incredibly proud of you.
Hey, thank you. And if I could just say, I don't think your ideas are radical. I like to say they're radical. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, I like that. We got to get that on a shirt, Amma Bernie.
All right.
I love that. We're going to adopt that. Radical.
You say radical, Aisha.
All right, Aisha, thank you very much. Misty, next question.
Yes, great. So we have another question, and this person is tuning in from a state you have been talking a lot about lately, Senator, from Houston, Texas.
Yes.
And he is here to ask the panel a question. Welcome to the show, Farouk.
Well, thank you so much for having me here on this distinguished panel. I mean, I'm just amazed that I've been allowed to be here. With my seasonal allergies, you can tell that I am from Houston, Texas. My name is Farouk Shamsi. Since moving to the United States as a child, I've lived in Montana, Kentucky, and now Texas. In my 57 years, I have never seen the open bashing and acceptance of hatred so bad. I'm not saying that prejudice didn't exist before, it did, but now it's acceptable to vilify and suppress people openly. My question to the panel is, how will you instill confidence in the people of this country that new leadership will restore our value as human beings and turn away from the hate and the bigotry that has dominated this current atrocious administration?
Farouk, thanks so much for that question. Let me start it off. Keith, did you want to, Keith Ellison has been in the forefront of the fight for human dignity and civil rights for his entire life. Keith, did you want to jump in and
Yeah.
respond to Farouk?
You know, Bernie, I would say that we anything different from Trump will be a dramatic improvement in terms of human solidarity. But what we really need to learn is the lesson that it's not about one messianic leader, you know, not me, us. I mean, the idea that we really dig in and build connection between each other, it's just like what I heard Rashida just say. We are a country that has 320 million people, but we're more lonely than ever. We need to build bonds of connection with each other and use politics to build that solidarity and unity. Politics offers a lot to us. Through politics, you can walk up and talk to somebody you've never met before about the most pressing issues in our lives. Your healthcare, for example, that's pretty personal. But also the pay gap. The fact that people have a right to have a voice on the job. You can use politics to build that solidarity and build that connection. We've used the word capitalism on the show. One of the things about that system that we live under is that it's disconnecting, because it tells us all, you're on your own, worry about yourself, don't worry about anybody else, get yours. I got mine, you get yours if you can. And so we can use some of the values that were infused in the Sanders campaign, that not me, us ethic, to really do more than just win an election. We can rebuild community with that. And so let's just keep it going. Let's not stop after the election. Let's not do the typical Democratic Party thing where once we win, we go back to our old ways that got us into trouble. And I'm gonna end on this, Bernie. If we do not infuse the values of building community and connection, if we don't do that, I'm gonna tell you, we might win this election and lose 4 years later to the likes of Tom Cotton or some real extremists. So let's keep it rolling. Let's keep it going and build community and connection.
Keith, I just could not agree with Keith more, but who was that? Rashida, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, Farouk, I love your question, and I think it's important because it is recognizing this dilemma I think many of communities of color are dealing with what's on the ballot and what does that really mean about the increased hate in our increased hate towards many of our communities. To piggyback, I think Attorney General Ellison is right on. I hope everyone that's listening, sees this as a partnership, because one of the key things I want to share with you all is, before I became a member of Congress, I was running a campaign to take on hate. And it's a national campaign. I was in a masjid in Flint. And this is when the current president was campaigning on the Muslim ban. He was out there saying such awful things about all kinds of people. He still does, hasn't changed. And this young Muslim sister, she looked like she may be in high school. And Farouk, she stood up in the audience and she said, Sister Rashida, how come no one is saying anything about what he's saying about Muslims? And I said, sis, and what did we say as a community when he said that Mexicans were rapists? And I say that to you all because it is so important that we don't wait until our community is the one under attack, that we're speaking up now. What I love about the Black Lives Matter marches in Detroit, with Detroit Will Breathe, is I see the Muslimas in the crowd. I see the different, beautiful, incredible diversity in the crowd. And I'm so proud because they're standing up for Black Lives Matter. They're standing against the murdering of our Black neighbors and that kind of oppression. That's what we need to do. It actually freaks them out when we work together, when we understand, if you go after my Latino neighbor, you're going after me. If you're going after my Jewish neighbor, you're going after me. And there's so much power to that. So I hope we understand that no matter who was in the White House, that work needs to continue in our communities.
Very well said. Ms. Lee, do you have another question?
We do. We have another person tuning in from Raleigh, North Carolina. We have Layla Ali with us. Welcome to the show, Layla.
Hey, y'all. Thank you. Again, my name is Layla Ali, and I'm a proud Muslim Egyptian American organizer from North Carolina. My question is about how we ensure that our community's votes are counted in this year's election. For me, this hits home. I took my first steps as an organizer when I was a student at NC State University, when North Carolina was fighting one of the most suppressive voter ID laws in the country. And I stood alongside other students to keep our early voting precinct on our campus safe, because we knew exactly who was being barred by these harsh restrictions. It was young people, women, Black and brown folks, and low-income communities. It's 2020, and we are still battling voter suppression in North Carolina and across the country. And not to mention, we have a president who has no problem promoting it. To the panel, how can we as a community and you as elected officials work together to protect every American's right to the ballot box?
Let me start it off and then others jump in. Layla, thank you so much for the enormously important work you're doing in North Carolina and for asking that pivotal question. When we think about American democracy, there are two major flaws that come to my mind. First, our disastrous campaign finance system that allows billionaires to buy elections. I happen to be old-fashioned. I believe in one person, one vote. I don't believe that corporations are people. I don't think that billionaires should be able to spend unlimited amounts of money to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. So that's one issue. But the second issue that we are seeing right now, literally today, and what Layla is talking about, is an election system which is incredibly flawed. We just tweeted out something in Georgia today. In Georgia, people were waiting 5 hours online in order to cast a vote. And from the photograph in the paper, most of them were African American. I remember in 2016, a young woman told me in Arizona, she waited 7 hours. Right now, Trump and the Republicans are mounting an unprecedented effort to suppress the vote. Layla is exactly right. They know who they're targeting. They're targeting people of color. They're targeting young people, people who are going to vote against them. They're doing it through all these phony voter ID laws. They're doing it in Texas by removing drop boxes so that people have to go long distances in order to drop their ballot into a safe box. And this is not by accident. So to answer your question, in my view, what we have to do is move away from this situation where each state makes the rules. Some states are very positive about it. They call for early voting, voting by mail. You can register to vote on the day that you vote. They are doing what they can. And my own state of Vermont is one of those states trying to say, hey, we want you to vote. We're going to make it as easy as possible. There are other states that are doing exactly the opposite. So, in my view, the federal government, the United States Congress, has got to act and pass legislation which says if you are 18 years of age in this country and a citizen, you will vote. And in a dozen different ways, we're going to make it as easy as possible. And we will not allow any state in this country to intimidate voters or to make it hard for them to vote. So I think the federal government has got to step in and end this mishmash of each state doing it differently and some states being absolutely outrageous in trying to keep people from voting. Keith, we got an attorney general here. So why don't we go to Attorney General Ellison. Keith, what's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I want everybody to know that Democratic attorney generals went to court and sued Curtis DeJoy and the U.S. Postal Service under Trump to stop them from messing with the mails. That was the district court judge found that this was a clear politically motivated effort to undermine and try to advantage the Trump campaign. We won, we beat them, and I'm proud of that. Let me also say that Democratic attorney generals right now, we formed a national coalition where we are working every single day to fight to protect the vote. Even today, we had a meeting on how they're, quite honestly, they're trying to mess with drop boxes. They're talking about sending armed guards to polling places, and we are not going to put up with it. It is against federal and state law to interfere or intimidate voters. They do it, and they're going to get served with an immediate complaint, get sued. We will be in court with a temporary injunction against these people. We're not playing with them, and we're organized, ready to fight. So We need folks to be in the street demanding a fair vote, demanding restoration of the Voting Rights Act. And I want you all to ask your Attorney General, what are you doing in your state to protect the vote?
Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, and by the way, Layla, Josh Stein is part of our crew, so just so you know.
Ilhan or Rashida, you got thoughts on that?
Ilhan, you are, I was going to let Ilhan go. I don't know, Layla, one of the things about voter suppression, it's been there. Even when I was working on other presidential campaigns, I remember being a young law student and going in and this approach of especially English as second language immigrant voters going in. And if there wasn't a hyphen in the name, they said, oh, you couldn't vote. I mean, there was the kind of intentional information they were putting out. And I would sit there and this, Republican kind of challenger would come in and I'm like, dude, kind of pushing back on that. But it is something that is so much part of, unfortunately, the history in our country, this type of voter suppression. I mean, I think I learned from so many of my Detroit Public Schools teachers about having to take math tests and all this stuff just to prevent people from, if you think about it, my mother, Amo Bernie's grandparents, we could have never paid that test. It doesn't mean that we don't have a right of self-determination, a right to be able to have a voice in that system. I can just tell you, one of the key things that I'm focusing on this time, of course, we're going to fight back against this type of voter suppression in the way that they're trying to make sure all of our votes are not counted, is making sure that it's too big to rig, right? It's so big that the turnout that we're continuing to push back. I am telling folks, you have to make sure that that you are working your block, taking your family. I'm the eldest of 14. We literally are a voting block. But I know if I don't text certain cousins or sisters or brothers, I know if I don't send my sister-in-law a text saying, hey, I hope you're going out to vote. And Layla, I'm one of those big sisters, and Ilhan will tell you, I will actually look it up in January and find out which relatives, I don't know how they voted, but I can find out whether or not they voted or not. And I will tell them, because you didn't show up, you didn't care about your community, your neighborhood. And that's how I'm pushing back against folks that say, hey, my stuff isn't counted. You have to fight back. And the way we fight back is we show up and we push back against any form of suppression, any form of attack on our right to vote. And so I just want you all to know that at this moment, you are so needed. Don't let the intimidation, don't let any of these myths and stuff. Our Attorney General had to go after these fools that were trying to send out robocalls and preventing people in my community to come out and vote. We're going to fight back because we have attorney generals like Keith Ellison. But in the meantime, you all have to help us and be our partners and go out there and again, make sure this election is too big to rig.
Good. Anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I think everything has already been said that I was going to say, but I will just emphasize that it is important for people to remember that we have to be assertive. That there is going to be folks who are interested in limiting our access and creating, intimidation, fighting us at every turn. And if our vote wasn't as important as it is, they wouldn't fight so hard to limit our ability to vote. And in Minnesota, even though we have very accessible elections, there are still tactics that are played. There's still intimidation. There are still folks that are trying to make sure minority communities, newer immigrant communities, Muslims and such aren't mobilizing themselves as they normally would. And every single election, our communities have responded with even higher mobilization. And so I think the answer to their tactics is for us to get aggressive and for us to organize ourselves. And there is an opportunity really to turn every single community into volunteers, into voters, into protectors of that vote, I come from Somali immigrant community in Minnesota, and we have one of the highest voter turnout, and that has happened because people were so invested in making sure we didn't actually vote, that we've used that to excite ourselves and energize our communities to coming out and proving everyone wrong.
Let me just pick up on Ilhan's point and just say to everybody, there is a reason why they are working overtime with every trick in the book to prevent you from voting. They don't want you to vote. And if they don't want you to vote, you better catch on that your vote is enormously important. They know it. Now it's your turn to know it. As Rashida said, the way to deal, the antidote to all that is to come out and vote in large numbers and to win this election big time. All right, with that, Misty, what do we got?
Well, I think it's very clear we got to make this election too big to rig, in the words of Congresswoman Tlaib. And Dr. Tlaib, help us understand, how can folks watching right now help make this election too big to rig? What do folks need to do right now to take action?
All right, so you need to talk to your ammus and your khaltos and your aunties and your uncles and their kids and their parents.
Cousins,
literally
a lot of cousins.
All your cousins, right? And you need to make sure that they understand exactly where and how to vote. Make sure that they're registered, walk them through the process, ask them for their plan, and then hold them accountable to their plan. Just like Representative Tlaib told you, right? When they tell you that they're going to vote, you follow up. Did you vote yet? Did you vote yet? Did you vote today? How about today? Did you vote today? Make it so annoying that just to shut you up, they get their ballot in. Because at the end of the day, the only way that we collectively, right, shut this individual in the White House down, the only way that we show what our community can do, we build our power, we fight for justice, is by making sure that every last person in our communities votes. I'll tell you, I remember when I ran in Michigan, it was a part of the community that actually had double trouble, me and Representative Tlaib on the ballot. And I remember seeing a van of like literally 15 people in a 7-person van roll up to a voting spot, right? And it was like people tumbling out of the van. And I remember talking to the elder in the van, and he told me, this is the first time, I've been a citizen for 10 years, but this is the first time I've ever come out because I had something to vote for. And what we are voting for now is our dignity as a community, is a future where we maintain our democracy, and is a recognition that we have a voice and we are fighting for the collective of all of us. So please don't leave any stone unturned. Reach out to every single person, make them give you a voting plan, make them follow through on their plan, and let's go get it.
Well, on that note, and thanks, Abdul, because you're exactly right. On that note, let me thank Abdul and Keith and Ilhan and Rashida for the extraordinary work they do every single day on behalf, not just the Muslim community, but all Americans. And let me thank all of those who asked those wonderful questions. And let me thank all of you who are watching this live stream tonight. Thank you all very much, and we will see you soon.